There's a conversation happening inside you that no one else can hear. It begins before you speak to the world, before you answer a message, before you make a decision, before you look in a mirror, before you decide whether today will be another day of survival or the beginning of something entirely different. It is the conversation you have with yourself. But Carl Jung would have told us that this voice is not as simple as most people believe. It is not just thought. It is not just habit. It is not just the mind repeating random words in the background. It is the doorway to the unconscious. And hidden behind that doorway is the part of you that you have rejected, silenced, feared, denied, and misunderstood. Jung called this part the shadow. The shadow is not evil. The shadow is not your enemy. The shadow is not some dark monster waiting to destroy your life. The shadow is the part of you that had to disappear so you could be accepted. It is your anger that was never allowed to speak. Your sensitivity that was mocked. Your confidence that was called arrogance. Your desire that was called selfish. Your truth that made other people uncomfortable. Your power that you learned to hide because someone once made you feel guilty for having it. And because you did not know how to speak to this part of yourself, you began speaking against it. You called yourself too much, too emotional, too intense, too complicated, too sensitive, too damaged, too late, too broken to change. But what if the problem was never that you were broken? What if the problem was that you were speaking to yourself through the voice of people who never understood you? What if the voice inside your mind is not even your real voice? This is where transformation begins. Not when your circumstances change. Not when someone finally apologizes. Not when the world validates your pain. Not when life becomes easy. Transformation begins the moment you notice that the way you speak to yourself has been shaping the entire structure of your reality. Every day, without realizing it, you are giving instructions to your unconscious mind. When you say, "I cannot do this," the unconscious listens. When you say, "I always fail," the unconscious listens. When you say, "People always leave me," the unconscious listens. When you say, "Nothing ever changes for me," the unconscious listens. And slowly, your body begins to obey. Your emotions begin to obey. Your choices begin to obey. Your relationships begin to obey. Your life begins to organize itself around the inner command you keep repeating. This is why Jung's famous insight matters so deeply. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most people think fate is what happens to them. But often, what they call fate is only an unconscious pattern repeating itself through their thoughts, emotions, reactions, choices, and relationships. They keep choosing the same kind of person. They keep tolerating the same kind of pain. They keep abandoning themselves in the same way. They keep shrinking in front of the same type of authority. They keep postponing the same dream. They keep hearing the same inner sentence. Not yet. Not you. Not possible. And because the pattern is unconscious, they believe life is doing this to them. But Jung would say, life is showing you what is still hidden inside you. The outer world is not always punishment. Sometimes it is a mirror. And one of the clearest mirrors is the way you speak to yourself when no one is watching. Listen carefully to the voice inside you when you make a mistake. Does it guide you, or does it attack you? Listen to the voice inside you when you want something bigger. Does it encourage you, or does it humiliate you? Listen to the voice inside you when someone rejects you. Does it remind you of your worth, or does it use the rejection as evidence that you were never enough? Listen to the voice inside you when you're tired, scared, uncertain, or lonely. Does it become a wise companion, or does it become the same voice that wounded you years ago? This is the painful truth. Many people are not living with an inner guide. They are living with an inner critic that sounds like a parent, a teacher, an ex-partner, a family system, a culture, a religion, or an old wound. They think they are thinking, but they are actually repeating. They are repeating the sentence that made them small, repeating the fear that kept them obedient, repeating the shame that made them hide, repeating the rejection that convinced them love must be earned through self-abandonment. And then they wonder why their life does not change. But how can your life change if the voice creating your emotional reality is still speaking the language of your old pain? This is why talking to yourself is not a small thing. It is not a motivational trick. It is not empty positivity. It is not pretending everything is fine. It is psychological reconstruction. It is the deliberate act of taking back the inner throne from every voice that entered your mind without permission and began ruling your life as if it belonged there. For years, You may have spoken to yourself like someone trying to survive. You may have said, I just need to get through this. I cannot handle more. I am tired of trying. Maybe this is all I deserve. Maybe other people are meant for more, but not me. And maybe you did not notice how often those words became instructions. The unconscious mind does not only respond to logic. It responds to repetition. It responds to emotion. It responds to images. It responds to identity. So when you repeatedly speak to yourself as someone powerless, your unconscious begins protecting that identity. It avoids risk. It avoids visibility. It avoids love. It avoids success. It avoids change. Not because you are lazy, not because you are weak, not because you lack potential, but because your inner world has been trained to believe that expansion is unsafe. Your shadow knows this. Your shadow remembers the moment you learned to hide. It remembers when you were told not to speak. It remembers when your emotions were too inconvenient. It remembers when your confidence was punished. It remembers when being yourself cost you love. It remembers when you decided, consciously or unconsciously, I will become what they need me to be, so I will not be abandoned. And from that moment, your true self went underground, but did not die. It waited. It waited in your dreams. It waited in your anger. It waited in your envy. It waited in your exhaustion. It waited in the strange sadness you could not explain. It waited in the feeling that there must be more to your life than the role you have been performing. The shadow does not disappear when you ignore it. It speaks through symptoms. It speaks through resentment. It speaks through self-sabotage. It speaks through emotional numbness. It speaks through the relationships you cannot leave. It speaks through the dreams you keep delaying. It speaks through the anger that rises when someone crosses the same boundary for the 100th time. And if you do not learn to speak to your shadow consciously, it will speak through your life unconsciously. This is why the first step is not to fight the shadow. The first step is to listen, not with fear, not with shame, not with judgment, but with the courage of someone who is finally ready to come home to themselves. Tonight, you're not going to learn how to destroy the dark parts of yourself. You're going to learn how to speak to them, because the part of you that you have been running from may be the very part that holds the energy you need to change your life. The anger you buried may become boundaries. The grief you avoided may become wisdom. The confidence you suppressed may become purpose. The desire you judged may become direction. The voice you silenced may become the voice that finally saves you. But only if you stop speaking to yourself like an enemy. Only if you stop repeating the language of your wounds. Only if you begin speaking to your shadow as if it belongs to you. Because it does. And what belongs to you can be integrated. What is integrated becomes power. And what becomes power begins to change the shape of your life. Before we go deeper, take a moment to subscribe to the Kingdom Within if this message is already touching something you have lived but never fully understood. This channel is for those who are ready to face the unconscious, heal the shadow, and become whole. Now, let us begin with the first practice. The first way to speak to your shadow is this. I see you. I am no longer abandoning you. Most people spend their entire lives trying to become better by rejecting the parts of themselves they do not like. They reject their fear. They reject their anger. They reject their insecurity. They reject their jealousy. They reject their need for love. They reject their sensitivity. They reject their pain. But rejection does not create transformation. Rejection creates division. And a divided person cannot become whole. A divided person may look successful on the outside, but inside they are at war. One part tries to move forward. Another part pulls backward. One part wants love. Another part fears being seen. One part wants success. Another part believes success will bring judgment, rejection, or loss. One part wants peace. Another part is addicted to chaos because chaos feels familiar. This is why willpower alone does not work. You cannot force yourself into a new life while the rejected parts of you are still running the old one from the unconscious. You must build a bridge, and the bridge begins with recognition. When fear appears, do not immediately say, I should not feel this. Say, I see the part of me that is afraid. I understand that it is. To protect me. When anger appears, do not immediately say, I'm a bad person for feeling this. Say, I see the part of me that is angry. I understand that something in me knows a boundary has been crossed. When sadness appears, do not immediately say, I need to get over this. Say, I see the part of me that is grieving. I understand that something important was lost, denied, or never received. This changes everything. Because the unconscious does not soften under attack. It softens under awareness. The shadow does not integrate because you shame it. It integrates because you finally stop treating it like an exile. And this is where your life begins to change. Because the moment you stop abandoning yourself internally, you begin tolerating less abandonment externally. The moment you stop dismissing your own pain, you become less available to people who dismiss it. The moment you stop calling your boundaries selfish, you stop giving your energy to relationships that survive only when you betray yourself. The way you speak to yourself becomes the standard for the way others are allowed to speak to you. And this is why talking to your shadow is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect. Not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you whole. Claro, Alexandra. Continuando o roteiro em inglês. Hashtag roteiro. Bloco 2. Hashtag the shadow does not need punishment. It needs language. The second way to speak to your shadow is this. Understand why you became this way. This sentence may feel simple, but psychologically it is profound. Because most people do not heal because they are still trying to punish themselves into becoming someone better. They believe that if they are harsh enough, critical enough, disciplined enough, ashamed enough, they will finally become worthy. But shame does not create wholeness. Shame creates hiding. And whatever hides inside you does not disappear. It grows in the dark. This is one of the deepest lessons in Jung's psychology. What we refuse to bring into consciousness does not leave us. It controls us from below the surface. The part of you that is jealous does not vanish because you shame it. The part of you that is angry does not disappear because you call it immature. The part of you that wants recognition does not become humble because you pretend you do not care. The part of you that is afraid of being abandoned does not become secure because you tell it to stop being needy. It simply goes underground. And from underground, it begins shaping your choices without your permission. You say you want love, but your shadow chooses people who confirm your fear of rejection. You say you want peace, but your shadow keeps you attached to chaos because chaos feels familiar. You say you want success, but your shadow sabotages visibility because being seen once felt dangerous. You say you want freedom, but your shadow keeps returning to the same cage because at least that cage is known. This is why you cannot insult yourself into transformation. You cannot reject yourself into freedom. You cannot hate yourself into becoming whole. You must begin by understanding why certain parts of you developed in the first place. Because every shadow pattern once had a reason. Maybe your silence began as protection. Maybe, as a child, speaking honestly caused conflict, punishment, ridicule, or rejection. So you learned to swallow your truth. You learned to read the room before you read your own heart. You learned to sense other people's moods before you sense your own needs. And over time, silence became not only a habit, but an identity. You became the one who did not complain, the one who understood, the one who adapted, the one who kept the peace, the one who carried the emotional weather of the entire room. But beneath that silence, anger was growing. Not because you were a bad person, because something in you knew that your truth had been sacrificed too many times. Maybe your people-pleasing began as survival. Maybe love in your early life felt conditional. Maybe affection arrived only when you were useful, obedient, cheerful, forgiving, or easy to manage. So you learned that being loved required performance. You learned to make yourself convenient. You learned to become the version of yourself that created the least resistance in others. And now, years later, you may call yourself kind. But part of your kindness may actually be fear. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of being disliked. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being seen as selfish for having a self. This does not mean your kindness is false. It means your kindness needs to be purified. It needs to stop being a mask for self-abandonment. It needs to become a choice, not a wound. Maybe your self-doubt began as emotional conditioning. Maybe someone made you feel small whenever you showed confidence. Maybe they get at your dreams. Maybe they compared you to someone else. Maybe they praised you only when you stayed modest, quiet, and easy to control. So now, every time you begin to rise, something inside you whispers, do not be too visible. Do not want too much. Do not think you are special. Do not become someone they cannot recognize. And you mistake that whisper for humility. But it is not humility. It is fear disguised as virtue. True humility does not require you to shrink. True humility allows you to grow without needing to feel superior. There is a difference between being humble and being afraid of your own light. Your shadow knows this difference. Your soul knows this difference, but your conditioned mind may still be loyal to the voices that taught you to stay small. This is why you must speak to the shadow with understanding, not to excuse every behavior, not to justify harm, not to remain trapped in the past, but to finally stop fighting symptoms and begin understanding origins. Say to yourself, I understand why I learned to be quiet. I understand why I became afraid of conflict. I understand why I tried to be needed. I understand why I doubted my own worth. I understand why I kept choosing people who could not choose me. I understand why I confused intensity with love. I understand why I stayed longer than I should have. I understand why I abandoned myself. There is no weakness in this. There is power in this. Because once you understand the origin of a pattern, you're no longer possessed by it in the same way. Awareness creates separation, and separation creates choice. Before awareness, the pattern says, this is who I am. After awareness, the soul says, this is what happened to me, and now I can choose differently. That shift is the beginning of freedom. The shadow loses power when it is understood, not because it becomes weak, but because it becomes integrated. It no longer has to scream through sabotage. It no longer has to speak through resentment. It no longer has to drag you into the same painful situation just to get your attention. It can finally become part of your conscious life. And when that happens, the same energy that once worked against you begins to work for you. Your anger becomes discernment. Your fear becomes preparation. Your grief becomes compassion. Your envy becomes direction. Your loneliness becomes inner listening. Your sensitivity becomes perception. Your desire becomes a map. This is the alchemy Jung was pointing toward, not the destruction of the dark, but its transformation. The unconscious is not conquered by violence. It is transformed through relationship. And the most important relationship you will ever build is the one between your conscious self and the hidden parts of your own psyche. So tonight, ask yourself, what part of me have I been punishing that actually needs understanding? What part of me have I called weak that was only trying to survive? What part of me have I judged as broken that may actually be carrying an old wound? What part of me have I tried to silence that may be holding the truth I need most? Do not rush these questions. Let them move through you slowly. Because the shadow does not reveal itself to the impatient. It reveals itself to the honest. It reveals itself when you stop pretending that healing means being light all the time. There are parts of you that cannot be healed through positivity alone. They need truth. They need language. They need to be met in the exact place where you once abandoned them. And when you finally meet them there, you may discover that the darkness you feared was not darkness at all. It was unloved life. Life that had been pushed away. Life that had been denied expression. Life that had been waiting for permission to return. This is why the second sentence matters so much. I understand why you became this way. Say it to the part of you that gets defensive. Say it to the part of you that overthinks. Say it to the part of you that cannot trust easily. Say it to the part of you that becomes anxious when someone pulls away. Say it to the part of you that wants to run when love gets too close. Say it to the part of you that feels guilty for resting. Say it to the part of you that feels ashamed for wanting more. You are not approving of every reaction. You are beginning a conversation. And this conversation changes your inner world because it replaces inner violence with inner authority. Inner authority does not shout. It is not shame. It is not collapse. It says, I see what happened. I understand the wound, but I will not let the wound rule my life anymore. That is the voice of the integrated self. That is the voice of someone beginning to reclaim the kingdom within. And once this voice becomes stronger than the old voice of shame, your life begins to reorganize. You no longer run from every uncomfortable emotion. You no longer treat every trigger as proof that you are failing. You no longer believe that being wounded means being powerless. You begin to see every reaction as information, every emotional charge as a doorway, every repeated pattern as a message from the unconscious asking to be brought into light. This is the moment when self-talk becomes shadow work, because now you're no longer speaking only to the surface mind. You are speaking to the hidden architecture of your personality. You are speaking to the younger self who adapted, the rejected self who disappeared, the angry self who was never allowed to speak, the powerful self who learned to hide, the loving self who became exhausted from giving too much. And when these parts begin to trust that you will no longer abandon them, they stop fighting you. They stop pulling you backward. They stop seeking attention through pain. They become available for integration. And integration is not softness alone. Integration is strength, because a person who understands their own darkness is no longer easily controlled by the darkness of others. A person who has faced their own fear is no longer manipulated so easily by fear. A person who has listened to their own anger is no longer fooled by false peace. A person who has met their own loneliness no longer sells their soul just to avoid being alone. This is why your life changes when you learn to talk to your shadow. Not because the world instantly becomes easier, but because you stop being divided against yourself. And a person who is no longer divided carries a different presence. They speak differently. They choose differently. They love differently. They leave differently. They enter rooms differently. They stop begging for permission to exist. They stop apologizing for having needs. They stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. They stop calling abandonment love. They stop confusing endurance with loyalty. And people feel it. They may not understand what changed, but they feel that you're no longer negotiating with yourself. They feel that the old access point is gone. They feel that guilt no longer opens the door as easily. They feel that your silence is not weakness anymore. It is self-possession. And this self-possession begins with the way you speak inwardly. So today, when the old voice rises and says, "What is wrong with me?" Pause, breathe, and say, "Nothing is wrong with me. Something happened to me, and now I am learning how to become whole." When the old voice says, "I should be over this by now," say, "I am not late. I am meeting myself at the pace my nervous system can handle." When the old voice says, "I always ruin everything," say, "I'm learning how to respond from consciousness instead of repeating from pain." When the old voice says, "No one will ever understand me," say, "I am learning to understand myself, and that is where my power begins." These sentences are not magic words. They are psychological corrections. They interrupt the old identity. They give the unconscious new instructions. They teach your body that you are no longer living under the same inner authority that once wounded you. And with repetition, something extraordinary begins to happen. The inner critic becomes less believable. The old shame becomes less convincing. The familiar fear becomes less absolute. And your deeper self begins to rise. Not loudly at first, not dramatically, but quietly, steadily, like a voice returning from exile. A voice that says, "I am still here." And when you hear that voice, do not dismiss it. Do not drown it in distraction. Do not hand it back to the people who taught you to doubt it. Listen, because that voice may be the beginning of the life you thought you lost. The third way to speak to your shadow is this: "You are safe to tell me the truth." This sentence is not for the world. It is not for the people who misunderstood you. It is not for the family system that trained you to stay quiet. It is not for the relationships where honesty was punished and silence was rewarded. This sentence is for the hidden part of you that learned to lie in order to survive. Not necessarily lie to others, but lie to yourself. Because there are certain truths a person cannot face when they're still dependent on the approval of the people who wounded them. There are truths you bury because accepting them would mean your life has to change. There are truths you deny because seeing them clearly would require you to stop making excuses for people. There are truths you avoid because once they rise into consciousness, the old version of you cannot continue living the same way. And this is where many people become trapped. They do not remain stuck because they lack intelligence. They remain stuck because part of them already knows the truth, but another part is terrified of what the truth will. Indeed, your shadow often carries the truth before your conscious mind is ready to admit it. Your body knows before your mind accepts. Your exhaustion knows. Your resentment knows. Your anxiety knows. Your dreams know. Your repeated frustration knows. Your silence knows. The part of you that feels heavy around certain people knows. The part of you that feels smaller after certain conversations knows. The part of you that keeps saying, "Something is wrong here," even when everything looks normal on the surface, that part knows. But instead of listening, many people attack themselves. They say, "Why am I so sensitive? Why can't I just let this go? Why do I always overthink? Why do I feel so tired around them? Why can't I be grateful? Why can't I just be normal?" But these questions are often forms of self-betrayal because they assume your reaction is the problem. They assume your discomfort is irrational. They assume your body is lying. They assume your nervous system is exaggerating. But Jung understood that the unconscious speaks symbolically. It does not always speak in direct sentences. Sometimes it speaks through symptoms, patterns, dreams, emotional charges, and strange inner resistance. Sometimes your soul does not say, "This person is not good for you." It simply makes you tired. Sometimes it does not say, you are betraying your purpose. It gives you a heaviness you cannot explain. Sometimes it does not say, you are living inside a false identity. It makes you feel disconnected from your own reflection. Sometimes it does not say, this relationship is repeating an old wound. It fills you with anxiety every time the same dynamic begins again. So when you speak to your shadow, you must create inner safety for truth. Not drama, not panic, not impulsive decisions. Truth, because there is a difference between reacting from a wound and listening to a wound. A reaction says, I must escape this feeling immediately. Listening says this feeling is showing me something. A reaction attacks. Listening observes. A reaction repeats the past. Listening begins to free you from it. This is why the sentence matters. You are safe to tell me the truth. Say it when you feel resentment rising. Because resentment is often the shadow's way of saying, I've been giving more than I can afford to give. Say it when envy appears. Because envy may be the shadow's way of saying, there is a desire in you that you have not allowed yourself to honor. Say when anger rises. Because anger may be the shadow's way of saying, a boundary has been crossed. I need you to stop pretending it has not. Say when you feel numb. Because numbness may be the shadow's way of saying, I had to shut down because feeling everything became too much. Say it when you keep procrastinating. Because procrastination may be the shadow's way of saying, part of me associates success with danger, exposure, rejection, or responsibility. Say it when you sabotage something good. Because self-sabotage may be the shadow's way of saying, I do not yet believe I am safe receiving what I have asked for. Most people judge the symptom, but the conscious person studies the message. This is the beginning of true inner authority. Instead of saying, why am I like this? You begin asking, what does this try to show me? What truth have I not admitted? What need have I denied? What boundary have I ignored? What desire have I buried? What pain have I minimized? What part of myself have I been trying to silence? These questions are powerful because they turn suffering into revelation. They do not make pain pleasant, but they make it useful. They allow the unconscious to become a teacher instead of a prison. And this is exactly where many people misunderstand shadow work. They think shadow work is about becoming darker, colder, more detached, or more mysterious. It is not. Shadow work is about becoming more honest. Honest about what you feel. Honest about what you want. Honest about what hurts. Honest about what you fear. Honest about what you are pretending not to know. Honest about the roles you are tired of playing. Honest about the love you keep chasing from people who cannot give it. Honest about the life you are outgrowing. And honesty is not always gentle. Sometimes honesty feels like grief, because when the truth rises, the fantasy falls. You may have to grieve the person you hope someone would become. You may have to grieve the family you wished you had. You may have to grieve the years you spent abandoning yourself for approval. You may have to grieve the version of yourself that survived by staying small. You may have to grieve the dream that was never truly yours, but was built from expectation, fear, and the need to be accepted. But grief is not failure. Grief is the price of returning to reality after living inside an illusion. And reality, even when painful, is always more powerful than illusion. Because once you see clearly, you can choose consciously. Before truth, you repeat. After truth, you decide. And the moment you decide from consciousness, your life begins to move in a different direction. This is why people around you may become uncomfortable when you begin speaking to your shadow honestly. They may not know what you are doing internally, but they will feel the results externally. You will stop agreeing so quickly. You will stop apologizing automatically. You will stop laughing at things that hurt you. You will stop calling disrespect miscommunication. You will stop calling emotional neglect distance. You will stop calling manipulation concern. You will stop calling your exhaustion love. You will stop calling self-abandonment loyalty. And when those words change, your entire life changes. Because language is not decoration. Language is perception. The words you use determine what your mind allows you to see. If you call a cage home, you will decorate it. If you call a wound love, you will protect it. If you call fear intuition, you will obey it. If you call self-betrayal kindness, you will keep sacrificing yourself. But if you begin naming things accurately, the unconscious reorganizes. You stop being hypnotized by the old story. You stop confusing pain with purpose. You stop believing that your worth depends on being chosen by people who cannot even meet themselves honestly. And this is where the shadow begins to trust you. Because your hidden self does not need you to be perfect. It needs you to stop lying. It needs you to stop dismissing what you know. It needs you to stop handing your truth back to people just because they deny it. There's a quiet kind of insanity that happens when you keep explaining reality to someone who benefits from distorting it. You begin doubting your memory. You begin negotiating with your intuition. You begin asking whether your pain is valid. You begin searching for the perfect sentence that will finally make someone understand what they already understand but refuse to admit. And the shadow watches. It watches you abandon yourself one explanation at a time. It watches you trade your truth for peace. It watches you betray your body in order to protect an image. And eventually, it rebels. That rebellion may look like anger. It may look like withdrawal. It may look like sudden clarity. It may look like disgust. It may look like a deep and unshakable tiredness. It may look like the moment you can no longer force yourself to be who you were. Do not fear that moment. That moment is not the end of you. It may be the end of the false self. And the false self will always experience truth as a threat. But the real self experiences truth as oxygen. So speak to the shadow. You are safe to tell me the truth. Then listen. Maybe the truth is, I'm tired of being needed by people who do not love me well. Maybe the truth is, I do not want this life anymore. Maybe the truth is, I am angry because I keep saying yes when I mean no. Maybe the truth is, I'm not confused. I am afraid of what clarity will cost. Maybe the truth is, I keep chasing unavailable people because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar love. Maybe the truth is, I want more, and I have been ashamed of wanting more. Maybe the truth is, I'm not lazy. I'm scared of being seen. Maybe the truth is, I have been calling survival peace. Let these truths come without immediately turning them into a plan. First, let them exist. A truth that is finally allowed to exist begins loosening the grip of the lie. You do not have to change everything in one day. You do not have to confront everyone immediately. You do not have to become fearless overnight. You only have to stop gaslighting yourself. You only have to stop making your inner truth prove itself in a court where fear is the judge. You only have to begin believing that your inner world is worth listening to. This is how the unconscious becomes conscious, not through force, through honest attention, through patient naming, through the courage to say, I know what I know. And this sentence alone can change the course of a life. Because many people do not need more advice. They need permission to trust what they already know. They need permission to stop explaining the obvious. They need permission to stop shrinking the truth so others can remain comfortable. They need permission to stop performing confusion when their soul has already reached clarity. Carl Jung's work was never only about understanding the mind as an idea. It was about becoming whole. And wholeness requires the truth. Not the truth that makes you look noble. Not the truth that keeps everyone pleased. Not the truth that fits the role you have been assigned. The real truth. The shadow. The truth that says, this hurts. This is not love. I am angry. I want more. I need rest. I have outgrown this. I am allowed to change. I'm allowed to stop abandoning myself. When you begin speaking this way internally, your body starts to relax. Because finally, someone inside you is telling the truth. Finally, you're no longer forcing yourself to live under the pressure of denial. Finally, the inner child, the wounded self, the hidden self, the silent self, and the powerful self all begin to feel that someone has returned. You have returned. And from this place, the next way to speak to your shadow becomes possible. Not only, I see you. Not only, I understand why you became this way. Not only, you are safe to tell me the truth, but something even more transformative. I will no longer use your pain to keep myself small. Hashtag roteiro. Bloco 4. Hashtag the fourth way to speak to your shadow. I will no longer use your pain to keep myself small. The fourth way to speak to your shadow is this. I will no longer use your pain to keep myself small. This is one of the most difficult sentences to say honestly, because many people do not realize that pain can become an identity. Not because they want to suffer, not because they enjoy being wounded, not because they are weak, but because the wound became familiar before freedom ever felt safe. There are people who say they want change, but deep inside, change feels dangerous. They say they want love, but love feels unfamiliar unless it comes with anxiety. They say they want success, but success feels threatening because it would require them to be seen. They say they want peace, But peace feels empty because their nervous system has been trained to confuse chaos with connection. They say they want a new life, but the old life still gives them a role they know how to play. And Jung would ask us to look beneath the surface. Because the question is not only, what do you want? The deeper question is, what part of you is afraid to receive what you want? This is where the shadow becomes very important. Because the shadow does not only contain what you hate about yourself, it also contains what you deeply desire but have not allowed yourself to claim. It contains the power you were told was too much, the ambition you were told was selfish, the beauty you were told to hide, the voice you were told to lower, the confidence you were told to soften, the desire you were told to feel ashamed of, the vision you were told was unrealistic, the authority you were punished for showing. So when you begin rising, the shadow may not only show fear, it may show resistance. You may feel guilty for becoming more visible. You may feel strange when life begins to improve. You may feel anxious when people treat you with respect. You may feel uncomfortable when you receive more than you're used to receiving. You may sabotage good things not because you do not want them, but because part of you has associated goodness with danger. This is why talking to your shadow must become deeper than positive thinking. It is not enough to say, I am successful, I am confident, I am loved, I am powerful. If somewhere inside you, an unconscious part whispers, no, you're not safe being that person, then the affirmation stays on the surface. It sounds beautiful, but it does not enter the body. The body still carries the old warning. Do not shine too much. Do not want too much. Do not need too much. Do not speak too clearly. Do not become different. Do not disappoint them. Do not leave the role. Do not become someone they can no longer control. This is why you must speak directly to the fear beneath the desire. Say, I know part of me believes that becoming powerful will make me unsafe. I know part of me believes that being loved deeply will end in abandonment. I know part of me believes that success will make people judge me. I know part of me believes that if I stop being useful, I will stop being loved. I know part of me believes that if I choose myself, I will lose everyone. These sentences matter because they bring the hidden agreement into consciousness. And once the hidden agreement is conscious, it can be questioned. Many people are not blocked by lack of desire. They are blocked by hidden loyalty. Loyalty to an old identity. Loyalty to a family story. Loyalty to a version of themselves that learned survival through limitation. Loyalty to the people who expected them to stay understandable, available, predictable, and small. There's a strange guilt that appears when you begin to outgrow the person you were trained to be. You may feel as if you are betraying someone, but sometimes what feels like betrayal is simply individuation. The soul leaving the collective expectation. The true self stepping out of the role. The adult self refusing to keep paying the emotional debt of childhood. The wounded self realizing that love should not require self-erasure. This is why some people will not celebrate your growth. Not because your growth is wrong, but because your old role served them. When you were the one who explained, they did not have to reflect. When you were the one who apologized, they did not have to take responsibility. When you were the one who carried everything, they did not have to grow stronger. When you were the one who stayed small, they did not have to confront the discomfort of your expansion. So your shadow may have learned. If I grow, I will be punished. If I tell the truth, I will be abandoned. If I become successful, I will be rejected. If I become confident, I will be called arrogant. If I become peaceful, I will no longer belong to the chaos I came from. And as long as these beliefs remain unconscious, they quietly command your life. You may think you are waiting for the right moment, but often you are waiting for permission from the very people who benefit from your hesitation. You may think you need more confidence, but often confidence appears only after you begin acting without the approval of those who taught you to doubt yourself. You may think you are not ready, but often not ready is the voice of the old wound trying to preserve the old identity. This is why you must speak to the shadow like a wise inner parent, not with aggression, not with impatience, but with authority. Say, understand that staying small once protected us. Understand that hiding once kept us safe. Understand that being agreeable once helped us survive. Understand that silence once prevented conflict. Understand that pleasing others once gave us a sense of belonging. But we are no longer living there. This phrase is essential. We are no longer living there. Because the shadow often reacts to the present as if it is still trapped in the past. It sees a new opportunity and remembers an old humiliation. It sees healthy love and remembers abandonment. It sees visibility and remembers ridicule. It sees choice and remembers punishment. It sees success and remembers the people who made you feel wrong for wanting more. So you must remind it. That was then. This is now. We survived that. We are allowed to choose differently now. We are allowed to become visible now. We are allowed to receive now. We are allowed to rest now. We are allowed to stop earning love through exhaustion. We are allowed to stop using pain as proof that we are good. This last sentence may touch something deep. We are allowed to stop using pain as proof that we are good. Because some people unconsciously believe that suffering makes them noble. They believe that if they give until they are empty, then they are loving. If they endure disrespect, then they are loyal. If they stay silent, then they are mature. If they need nothing, then they are strong. If they forgive endlessly, then they are spiritual. But Jung would not call this wholeness. He would see the imbalance. He would see the rejected self underneath the performance of goodness. He would see the shadow of the good person. Because every persona has a shadow. The persona of the helper has a shadow of resentment. The persona of the strong one has a shadow of exhaustion. The persona of the forgiving one has a shadow of anger. The persona of the spiritual one has a shadow of suppressed truth. The persona of the selfless one has a shadow of hidden need. And until you speak to that shadow honestly, your goodness will cost you your soul. So say, I do not need to suffer to be worthy. I do not need to disappear to be loved. I do not need to be endlessly available to be valuable. I do not need to stay loyal to situations that require me to betray myself. I do not need to make my life smaller so others can feel comfortable. These are not just affirmations. They are acts of inner liberation. They are the conscious self speaking to the unconscious pattern and saying, I see what you were doing. I understand why you did it. But I'm choosing a new way. And the moment you begin speaking this way, the shadow may resist. It may say, but what if they leave? What if they judge you? What if you fail? What if you lose everything? What if you become alone? And you answer, if they leave because I became whole, they were attached to my fragmentation. If they judge me for becoming honest, they were benefiting from my silence. If I fail, I will learn without abandoning myself. If I lose what depends on my self-betrayal, then I am losing a prison. If I become alone for a season, I will use that solitude to return to myself. This is how the inner conversation becomes sacred. You stop begging the wounded part of you to disappear. You begin leading it. You become the authority inside your own. And when this inner authority grows, your life changes not because you force the external world to obey you, but because you stopped obeying the old internal world that kept recreating the same external conditions. This is why some people change everything after one inner realization. They do not need a dramatic event. They do not need revenge. They do not need closure from another person. They simply stop speaking to themselves as if their wound is their destiny. They stop saying, this always happens to me, and begin saying, this pattern is asking to end through me. They stop saying, I am broken, and begin saying, I am integrating what was fragmented. They stop saying, I am too damaged, and begin saying, my pain is becoming consciousness. They stop saying, I have no power, and begin saying, the power I rejected is returning as wisdom. When you speak this way, you are not denying your pain. You are refusing to worship it. There is a difference. Denying pain says, nothing happened. Worshipping pain says, what happened defines everything I am allowed to become. But integration says, what happened is real, but it is not the end of my story. What happened shaped me, but it does not own me. What happened wounded me, but the wound can become a doorway. This is the language of transformation. This is the language that tells the unconscious. We are not going to use the past as a prison anymore. And slowly, your body begins to listen. Your posture changes. Your breathing changes. Your choices change. Your tolerance changes. Your standards change. Your relationships change. You stop moving toward what feels familiar if familiar means painful. You stop mistrusting what feels peaceful just because peace is unfamiliar. You stop romanticizing people who activate your oldest wounds. You stop calling anxiety passion. You stop calling inconsistency mystery. You stop calling rejection a challenge. You stop calling emotional hunger love. This is when your life begins to rise. Not because everything outside you is perfect, but because the inner command has changed. And when the command changes, the pattern begins to lose power. The shadow that once kept you small begins offering you the very energy you need to grow. The anger that once frightened you becomes the courage to say no. The desire that once embarrassed you becomes the courage to build. The loneliness that once terrified you becomes the ability to choose solitude over false belonging. The grief that once overwhelmed you becomes compassion for yourself and others. The sensitivity that once made you feel weak becomes perception, and the power you once hid becomes presence. This is the great secret. Your shadow is not only where your pain lives, it is also where your unlived life is waiting. Every dream you buried because someone told you it was unrealistic. Every truth you swallowed because someone made honesty unsafe. Every version of you that you sacrificed to belong. Every talent you minimized. Every boundary you delayed. Every desire you judged. Every part of your soul you placed in exile so the world would accept a smaller version of you is all there, waiting. And when you finally say, I will no longer use your pain to keep myself small, something inside you stands up. Not aggressively, not arrogantly, but truthfully. And truth has a frequency that false identities cannot survive. This is why the old life may begin to feel uncomfortable. You may find yourself unable to continue certain conversations, unable to laugh at certain jokes, unable to tolerate certain dynamics, unable to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, unable to keep saying yes when every cell in your body is saying no. This discomfort is not regression. It is evidence that your nervous system is updating its definition of safety. What once felt safe because it was familiar may now feel unbearable because your soul recognizes it as confinement. And what once felt dangerous because it was new may begin to feel like freedom. That is how transformation often feels. Not always peaceful. Sometimes it feels like restlessness. Sometimes it feels like losing interest in the life you used to beg to keep. Sometimes it feels like silence. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like finally admitting, I cannot go back to being that version of myself. And when that moment arrives, do not panic. Bless it, because it means the conversation inside you is changing. The shadow is no longer only carrying pain. It is carrying permission. Permission to want. Permission to rise. Permission to speak. Permission to rest. Permission to stop saving everyone. Permission to become difficult to manipulate. Permission to be loved without performing. Permission to choose a life that does not require you to abandon yourself every morning. So, tonight, before you sleep, place your attention inward and say, I understand that staying small once protected me, but I will no longer confuse protection with imprisonment. I will no longer confuse old fear with wisdom. I will no longer use my pain as proof that I cannot change. I will no longer use my wound as a reason to reject my power. I will no longer make myself less alive to keep others comfortable. I'm allowed to become whole. I'm allowed to become visible. I'm allowed to become free. And then breathe. Let the words descend below the mind. Let them reach the body. Let them reach the part of you that still trembles when change approaches. Let them reach the younger self who thought love required shrinking. Let them reach the hidden self who has been waiting for your permission. Because the moment your shadow believes that growth is safe, your life begins to move in ways that once seemed impossible. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally stopped rejecting the person you were always meant to become. The final way to speak to your shadow is this. You are coming with me, not behind me, not against me, not hidden in shame, not locked in the past. With me, because the goal of shadow work is not to cut pieces of yourself away. The goal is to become whole. For so long, you may have believed that healing meant becoming only light, only calm, only kind, only forgiving, only positive, only acceptable. But Jung would never have called that wholeness. Wholeness is not the absence of darkness. Wholeness is the ability to hold your light and your darkness without being possessed by either one. It is the moment you can feel anger without becoming destructive, feel fear without becoming controlled, feel desire without becoming ashamed, feel grief without believing your life is over, feel power without needing to dominate anyone, feel love without abandoning yourself. This is what happens when you stop fighting the shadow and begin integrating it. You stop saying, this part of me is unacceptable, and you begin saying, this part of me has something to teach me. You stop saying, I must destroy my anger, and you begin saying, my anger is showing me where I have betrayed myself. You stop saying, I must hide my desire, and you begin saying, My desire is showing me the direction of my unlived life. You stop saying, I must silence my fear, and you begin saying, my fear is showing me where I need more safety, more preparation, and more trust. You stop saying, I am broken, and you begin saying, I am becoming conscious. This is the real transformation. Not pretending the wound never existed. Not pretending the past did not affect you. Not pretending you are above human pain, but refusing to let the wound remain the ruler of your life. So now, when you speak to your shadow, do not speak like a victim begging for relief. Speak like the conscious self returning to its rightful place. Say, I see you. I understand why you became this way. You are safe to tell me the truth. I will no longer use your pain to keep myself small. And now, you are coming with me. Because the next version of you cannot be built by abandoning the parts of you that carried you through survival. The part of you that overthinks may become discernment. The part of you that once feared rejection may become emotional wisdom. The part of you that became silent may become sacred presence. The part of you that learned to please others may become deep compassion, but now with boundaries. The part of you that felt too much may become intuition. The part of you that carried anger may become courage. The part of you that felt alone may become inner authority. Nothing is wasted when it becomes conscious. This is the alchemy of the psyche. The same energy that once trapped you can become the energy that frees you. But only when you stop speaking to yourself as if you were a problem to solve. You're not a problem. You are a person becoming whole. And becoming whole requires a new inner language. From this moment forward, pay attention to the voice inside you. When it begins to attack you, pause. When it begins to repeat old shame, pause. When it begins to tell you that you're too late, too broken, too difficult, too emotional, too damaged, pause. Do not believe every voice that rises inside you. Some voices are memories. Some voices are wounds. Some voices are old authority figures still echoing in your nervous system. Some voices are fear trying to sound like wisdom. So pause, breathe, and ask, is this my true voice? Or is this an old wound speaking? That question alone can interrupt years of unconscious programming. Then choose a different sentence. Not a fake sentence. Not a sentence you do not believe, but a sentence that opens a door. Instead of, I cannot change, say, I am learning. To change one conscious choice at a time. Instead of, I always ruin everything, say, I'm no longer available to define myself by my worst moments. Instead of, no one understands me, say, I'm learning to understand myself deeply, and that is where my freedom begins. Instead of, I am too damaged, say, what was wounded in me can become wise in me. Instead of, this is just who I am, say, this is a pattern, and patterns can be made conscious. This is how life begins to change. Not all at once, not dramatically in one perfect moment, but quietly, through the next thought, the next pause, the next word, the next boundary, the next honest admission. The next time you choose not to abandon yourself. And over time, the inner world rearranges. You begin feeling less controlled by guilt, less hypnotized by fear, less addicted to old pain, less desperate to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You begin to stand differently. You speak with more clarity. You stop explaining what your soul already knows. You stop chasing what requires you to disappear. You stop shrinking so others can remain comfortable. And this is when people may say you have changed. But the truth is deeper than that. You have not become someone else. You have stopped betraying who you were. You have stopped leaving your power in exile. You have stopped calling your shadow an enemy. You have begun reclaiming the kingdom within. And once a person begins reclaiming their inner kingdom, they're no longer easy to control because they no longer need constant approval to feel real. They no longer need chaos to feel connected. They no longer need pain to feel worthy. They no longer need to be chosen by others in order to choose themselves. This is what Jung meant by becoming conscious. It is not merely understanding your mind. It is taking responsibility for the unseen forces that have been shaping your life. It is realizing that what you refuse to face will rule you, but what you bring into awareness can serve you. Your shadow is not here to destroy you. It is here to return what was lost. Your voice, your anger, your boundaries, your truth, your desire, your courage, your intuition, your power. So tonight, before you sleep, speak to yourself differently. Place your attention inward and say, I see the parts of me I once rejected. I understand that they were trying to protect me. I give them permission to tell the truth. I will not use the past as a prison anymore. I will not make myself small to be loved. I will not abandon my power to keep others comfortable. I am becoming whole. I am becoming conscious. I am becoming the person I was before the world taught me to hide. And then let silence answer. Do not force anything. Do not demand immediate proof. Just allow the unconscious to hear a new command. Because every life changes first as a whisper inside the mind, a sentence repeated with sincerity, a truth finally admitted, a wounded part finally welcomed home. And one day, you will look back and realize that your life did not change because the world suddenly gave you permission. It changed because you stopped waiting for permission. You stopped speaking to yourself like someone who had no future. You stopped treating your shadow like a curse. You stopped confusing your wound with your identity. And you began speaking to the hidden parts of yourself like they belonged. Because they do. And when all of you belongs to you again, your life cannot remain the same. If this message spoke to something deep within you, subscribe to the Kingdom Within. Leave a comment with the words, "I am becoming whole," if you are ready to stop abandoning yourself and begin the journey of integration. And remember, the shadow you fear may be the power you have been waiting for. The voice you silenced may be the voice that saves you. And the life you desire may begin with the next sentence you choose to speak to yourself.